Ladies and gentlemen, get on the edge of your seats because this is an Action Sports Jax special presentation. Storytellers of the 904.
44 years of chronicling sports in Jacksonville. The career dates back to 1969, though, from the Vermont Sunday News to the Florida Times-Union. Better writer than photographer, as witnessed by turkey and garbage can tweets. He's one of the most renowned storytellers of the 904. Kids in the 1980s, he covered every JU basketball game, home and away. That actually was a thing. It was a different time. In 1986, living in Jacksonville and working for a Jacksonville newspaper, he was a beat reporter for the Miami Hurricanes. That actually was normal back then. He would graduate to a columnist role, and folks in the media affectionately, most of the time affectionately, call him the columnist. Very original. He once got a one-on-one with Michael Jordan, and the article he wishes he wrote might surprise you. He retired in April 2025, and as we record this, he will throw out the first pitch tonight at the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp game. Hope the arm is warmed up. From the actual pitching mound, say hello to Gene Frenette. Nervous, maybe about this podcast, or maybe about that pitch?
Probably more about the pitch, because my one concern is that when I push off the mound, I don't want to be, like tripping over or falling down. As my when one of my cousins up in Connecticut found out about this, she tweeted me. The only thing she tweeted me was, "Don't embarrass the family."
Mission number one.
Yes.
Meanwhile, there might be some of your colleagues hoping for a little bit of that embarrassment.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Hey, listen, I know I'll go viral if I fall off that mound or throw the ball 15 feet in front of the plate.
You just retired, so it's not, and when this airs, and hopefully for years and years to come as people watch it, you'll have then been retired for longer. But are you happy with your decision? And is life pretty good, or is it hard to adjust right now?
Very happy with the decision. I actually kind of made it probably about a year and a half ago, after, even prior to my wife retiring. I kind of knew that I'd go 2 more football seasons, and sometime in 2025, I was going to get out, and I was going to get out before the football season started. Spring's a good time to go out. There's especially now, there's not really a whole lot going on. We're going to go into a little bit of a dead period here, and I always hated trying to write columns during this, late May to early July dead period, right? So it was a good time to go out, and quite frankly, the newspaper industry going where it is, right? I mean, let's not pretend, can't ignore the elephant in the room, right? Circulation at virtually 99% of the papers in the country is going down because there are so many places for people to go get news information, right? So I'm kind of glad that I'm getting out before I kind of see what is going to become of newspapers 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Will some of them still be publishing a newspaper, right? There's many newspapers that have gone to 5 days a week. One of the best papers in the state of Florida, the Tampa Times, is publishing 2 times a week. The Times-Union is still publishing every day, 7 times a week. I'm just glad I got to live out my dream job, other than being shortstop for the New York Yankees, when newspapers were really relevant.
Yeah.
Late 70s, 80s, and 90s was a really good wheelhouse for newspapers.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I got that part of it, got to live out that part of it, and seen a lot of changes. Obviously, the city of Jacksonville getting the Jaguars on November 30th, 1993, and starting play in 95. Big transition, right? And, gave all of us in the sports media a lot more to cover, and something really exciting, having an NFL franchise when there was no major professional league at all in Jacksonville.
We're going to bounce around here a lot, and some of it has to do with the background of the business and your business and how the business has changed. But you triggered me here to say, like, the NFL is so big now. Like, and I often say it on our show or whatever. It's just that, it keeps a lot of us in business, I think, in many respects. No way when the Jags got this franchise, you knew it was a big deal. Obviously, it's a big deal, professional franchise. But nobody could predict where the NFL is now. Forget about where the Jaguars are. The Jaguars have not been in the greatest of places, and still their value as a franchise is unbelievable. Is it astonishing to you, who's covered sports for so long and been a sports fan for so long, just how big the NFL is in the United States?
I think by the mid-1990s, we started to get a little bit of pretty good hint that it was going to get big. What I don't think a lot of people anticipated was how much the impact of television would just financially just explode the NFL. Mm. I mean, the Jaguars and Shad Khan's a perfect example, right? He paid $760 million for the franchise
in cash,
and now the franchise is worth what, $4.2 billion? I mean, it's just, and his net worth is probably quadrupled at minimum since he owned the team, and that's just 13 years now.
Yeah.
So I think the financial component is probably the most astonishing. If you're going to use the word astonishing, that's where I think that word applies when you look at the financial bottom line and the revenues of the NFL. I mean, just you look at what the draft is, how the draft has exploded, right? You look at, oh gosh, the NFL will never be in bed with gambling, but now DraftKings is one of their biggest sponsors. So much from that standpoint has changed, and it's pretty obvious. And this isn't just the NFL. This is the colleges. This is everything. Everything now is about the bottom line. Everything. I mean, even us in the media.
Oh, yeah.
The digital world and the clicks and all that stuff. All decisions made at the top filter down to what they're looking at the bottom line.
No doubt about it. Let's go back to those early days in Vermont. I just don't love you saying shortstop for the New York Yankees. A Vermont guy should be a Red Sox fan. Were there a lot of Red Sox / Yankee fans in Vermont?
I would venture to say that if you took a poll, at least when I was growing up, of how many baseball fans in Vermont were Red Sox and how many were Yankees, it would be a pretty even split.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because both of the club's television networks were available in New England. You had the Boston Red Sox network, which I think was NESN then. Yeah, and then you had WPIX out of New York with Phil Rizzuto, Bill White, and that crew, right? So it basically came down to who brainwashed you first. I mean, so I would say if you went through my neighborhood in the small town of Vermont, it was about half and half, whether it was Red Sox or Yankees. Same deal with NHL. Mostly Montreal Canadiens, but Boston Bruins as well. A small smattering of Rangers. But baseball was really the big sport in the Northeast. That was the sport, more so than the NFL back then.
Well, keep in mind, when you're growing up, too, you're coming off Mantle and DiMaggio and everything else. The Yankees are really hot. Heck, even in Rhode Island, where I'm from, it's split because of the Italians in Rhode Island, because of Joe DiMaggio. So the Yankees had that big of a brand. You said dream job. You wrote recently when you did retire about getting a job at 14 years old and kind of that first little dance, I think, with writing, right? I think it was pretty young. And is that what got you to say, hey, I want to do this more? That little bug started then?
Well, actually, yes, it did start at 14 in terms of I kind of knew that that's what I wanted to do. What I didn't know was how was I going to go about doing it. And what happened was my last year of Little League Baseball, my dad really annoyed me by getting out of coaching before my last year because he had coached my brother all the 4 years of his Little League, and he had coached me for the first 3, and we had a good team coming back because we had a lot of 12-year-olds on it. And then he announces, hey, I'm getting out of coaching. And then other coaches had gotten out, so they reshuffled the whole league. So they just threw all the names in the hat, and we were all on completely different teams. Oh, wow. And so though I was annoyed with my dad for getting out because we were going to have a really good team, just by sheer coincidence, the guy who ended up being my coach was was a sports writer in Vermont and was the 2-time sports writer of the year in the state of Vermont, even though he was basically an ad salesman, but he also wrote sports. And so after I was 14, I asked him if I could go with him to games that he covered just to see how he did it. And I kept tackles for him at high school football games, and I watched him interview coaches afterwards. So I, got a little bit of feel of what it was like. And then 6 months later, there was an opening on on the local Vermont Sunday News, and for covering mainly high school sports, a little bit of UVM and St. Michael's, and I got the job. Now I only worked one day a week. I worked on all day Saturday, and that was basically it, because that's when the games took place. I'd go to a game and I'd cover it. It'd be but the point being is I got my foot in the door. So to me, it was all about just let me write, just let me go cover stories, let me go make mistakes or whatever, but get a feel for what it's like. So fortunately, just toward the end of my junior year in high school, I was able to to be able to get a job. I incurred the wrath of a lot of my football playing classmates because I made picks every week.
Oh boy!
And only half the time did I pick my school to win, because they were an okay football program, but they were by no means the best one.
You were trying to be a true journalist.
Yeah. So I remember I picked them to lose the very first game, and oh my gosh! And I just thought, well, then I just told them, I go, prove me wrong. And, they lost 45-7 that game. So I never got much hassle after that.
But that was your education, right? I mean, because, listen, you can have an education in this business and there are different mediums, but your education is really doing it. And you had an early education to that.
Yeah, there was no question that was a big help. And I went from the weekly paper to the daily paper. Asked me to come over there, and I was a correspondent for them. Because I didn't know how much longer the Sunday paper was going to last, because the daily paper was going to a Sunday. The daily paper didn't. They were 6 days a week, and then they started printing on Sunday. And I knew as soon as I knew they did that the Sunday paper that I had worked for probably wouldn't have much long of a shelf life. It only lasted about 2 or 3 more years. But so before I came to Florida, I had 5 years of very part-time experience writing. But at least you're. To me, the more you write, the better you get. Or in theory, that's what it should be.
Do you think you were pretty good right away?
I thought I thought I had the basics down pretty well.
Yeah,
because I had, it just helps when you're a little kid to read I don't know how often I read Jim Murray's syndicated sport. Of course, Jim Murray's one of the all-time greats, right? Read his syndicated sports column like 2 or 3 times a week in the Gannett paper in Burlington, and I think that helps. So you sort of get a feel for, you're not going to write like Jim Murray, of course, but you sort of just, so often I would just even sometimes write out my own stories for nobody but myself, just to, to get the practice in. Back then it was the AP style, the whole inverted pyramid thing, right?
Yes.
Obviously the writing thing is much different now. But I just wanted to get a feel for it. And the more that I got a feel for it, the more I knew that that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, Murray's legendary. Like, so sooner or later, guys become legendary, and they are. And then you ask, like, well, okay, why? Like, what made a good writer to you? What still does, maybe, to you?
Well, Jim Murray was just phenomenal at being able to not only turn a phrase, but to also tell stories. And that's what kind of intrigued me a little bit, was that if you can find a way to, to tell a story. And I always say this, I said, sometimes your stories are only as good as the information that people are willing to share with you.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, and a lot of times people are willing to share because they feel a need to get their story out there. Right? And, sometimes it can be, a very fun story, and sometimes it can be, very sad and tragic. They're just both ends of the spectrum make for good writing. Just as a column can be good if you're praising somebody or you're criticizing somebody.
Yeah, maybe sometimes just subconsciously.
Well, to be honest with you, if a columnist is being truthful, you say, "What do you root for?" Well, I root for my column. And well, what do you mean by that? Does that necessarily mean that you want your team to win? Well, not necessarily. If I'm writing an 8:00 game on deadline and it's 11:10 at night, I don't want my team coming back from a 30-point deficit and changing. And just as I don't want them blowing a 30-point lead and changing, 6 or 7 graphs you've already written and counted on to be part of your part of your column for the next day's paper, right? So that's basically it. You want you don't want to make the job any more stressful than it already is, and so if the Jaguars are going to have a 30-point comeback, if Michael Thomas is going to catch a pass in the last play of the game to totally change the outcome of the Jaguars, let it be at a 1 o'clock start.
True. There is some selfish ambition here sometimes, folks, about where you need to land. You go back to the early 80s when you got here to Jacksonville. You make that move and you end up at the Florida Times-Union eventually. I think you were down, wrote for Fort Pierce as well. What was Jacksonville like? I think people kind of know what Jacksonville was like in the early 80s from a city standpoint, but you can give us your thoughts, but also from a media landscape and where the newspaper kind of played its role in all of that in the early 80s.
Yeah, well, I came as a prep writer. I covered high schools. That was my job. Mostly my job in Fort Pierce, although I did other things. And in West Palm Beach for a year and a half, covering preps was my job. I mean, I would occasionally go down and cover a Fort Lauderdale Strikers soccer game. I think I did maybe 1 or 2 Miami Dolphin games, but it was primarily high school and a little bit, of course, spring training baseball. So I came here as a prep writer. The Jacksonville Journal, which was the evening paper at the time, paid me $70 more a week to do the same job. So, and little tiny reduced cost of living up here in Jacksonville. So I took it. Thought I'd be here 2 or 3 years and then maybe move on to something else. Quite frankly, I loved the job. Did not care for Jacksonville when I first got here.
Why?
Number one, it was much more spread out than I thought it was. So it took forever to get to anywhere you wanted to go. But the thing that really annoyed me more than anything was having to drop a quarter into the toll bridge every time you went over any bridge in Jacksonville. Wow. I don't know, it just seemed odd to me that, I can understand a toll like, if you're out on the highway or something like that, and but in the city, every time you went over any bridge, you either had your booklet of tickets, which cost $2, which got you 10, or if you drop a quarter in, then you're going to be spending $2.50 if you just drop a quarter over 10. So sometimes I'd buy a booklet, sometimes I'd drop a quarter in. But it just annoyed me. So I was forever grateful to the late mayor Tommy Azori for getting rid of the toll bridges. I think it was like 88 or 89. Is that what he did? 88, 89? Yeah. But so I didn't really like Jacksonville, but I really liked the job and I liked the people.
What made you like Jacksonville? Like, when did you say, like, hey, I'm not leaving this place? Was it still job-driven, or was it kind of falling in love also with this place?
Honestly, it was more job-driven. I got promoted like 3 times in the 80s. I went from a high school writer, then I covered JU for 4 years. And during that time, they also had me go to every University of Miami home and road game, football game. 1986, Vinny Testaverde's Heisman Trophy year.
It's a big year.
They go to the Fiesta Bowl, and don't ask me why. I still can't believe the University of Miami lost that Penn State game. It was the only, this is a terrible thing to say. It's the only time I came away from a sporting event wondering, not thinking, not being sure, but wondering if the game was fixed. The only time that ever, because I still remember the last drive. I'm thinking to myself, here's Jimmy Johnson, who eventually turned out to be one of the great coaches in NFL history. They're trailing by, they're trailing 14-10. And they got the ball for the last time, and they're driving right down the field, drove about 75 yards down to the 1st and goal at the Miami 5-yard line. And most of that drive was taken up by runs by Alonzo Highsmith. There were a couple passes in there, but Alonzo Highsmith carried that drive. And the last 4 downs, Miami threw the ball. 4 downs in a row, 4 incomplete passes. I think the last one might have been intercepted. But I thought to myself, why? I mean, it wasn't a question of time.
Yeah.
I just wondered why Jimmy Johnson all of a sudden stopped giving the ball to Alonzo Highsmith, because he was getting 5, 4, 7, 6, kind of like that. And, here you are at the 5-yard line, 1st and goal. You would think he would have given it to him on the first 2 tries.
Yeah. And
he didn't. And Jimmy Johnson has since, said that that's one of the biggest regrets of his career. But
it didn't hand off.
Yeah. It was a mind-boggling finish to what was really not a very good game. I mean, Vinny Testaverde, I think Miami tripled Penn State in yardage in that game, but they had, 5 turnovers.
Wow. This part of this conversation is truly one of the motivations for this show. Storytellers of the 904. One of the reasons why I kind of wanted to do this, because I love our industry to begin with and just the different facets and how it's changed. Not always love everything that's changed, but I do love that part. And I just don't think people understand in Jacksonville. Like, you were covering every game for the Jacksonville University basketball team, like at that time. And we know what happened in the early 70s, and I think people know that, and they know Artis Gilmore. But this was before the Jags. It's very much a college football town as well. But the Jacksonville University basketball team is big, right?
It was big until, I would say, early 90s to mid. Once the Jaguars were born, they took up so much of the media coverage pie in the 904 that JU, I think, suffered incredibly because of it. We even cared a little bit, to some extent, about FSCJ basketball a little bit back in the day. High schools obviously are still big, but the Jaguars, once they came along,
chew up a lot of resources.
It chewed up a lot of, obviously the TV stations, the Times-Union, all of a sudden has to commit, a large share of their resources in sports coverage to the Jaguars, and a lot of other sports entities in town suffered because of it.
Yeah.
Right. So JU, the last time that I covered JU, it was their last time that they went to the NCAA tournament. 86. They went to the NCAA tournament, played Temple and Dayton, lost in overtime. Probably would have won the game if they hadn't lost their starting center in the first half to an eye injury. I went to places like Arizona, Oklahoma, Minnesota, places like that to cover JU basketball in the regular season. It wasn't as if there was I went everywhere with that, and I covered every single game. Now, we might cover 1 out of 2, 1 out of 3 home games, actually have a staff person. And there hasn't been a JU road game that was covered in I don't know how long. Maybe there might have been a relevant game at Stetson or something like that. But nobody gets on a plane to go cover JU basketball.
Maybe the NIT in 2009, I think, maybe.
They did, but I don't recall us going. They played Arizona State that year. But I don't because the game was in Arizona, so I don't think that we sent anybody out there for that game.
That was when I got to town, and JU was still, because they had gone to the ASUN championship game, I think 2 years in a row with Cliff.
Cliff Warren, yeah.
And so they felt at least bigger at the time, but you're right, it's given way, and resources have been a big part of it. But you just said, too, 86, you're going down to Miami and covering every single one of those games, and you had a Georgia beat writer as well. College football's huge in Jacksonville at that time, right? And not to say it's not big. We still know it's big. But somewhere in there, it shifts from a college football town to an NFL town.
No doubt about it. And you also have to keep in mind this. In the 80s, and even to some extent in the early 90s, newspapers were swimming in money.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you're swimming in money, what do? Well, you spend. So our travel budget was, obviously it's still big now because of what the Jaguars have, right? But back then, we thought nothing of sending 2 people on the road to go cover a Florida Auburn game, a columnist and a writer. That didn't even think twice about that.
The one that catches my attention in your article, in your retirement article, and some of the stories that you shared is that you covered the World Series out in California, the Earthquake World Series. And Storm Davis is obviously maybe a little angle there for you, but I think I've talked to you, and that wasn't the only reason you were out there, right? You had gone to cover the World Series.
Well, at that time, this was 1989, the Times-Union had routinely sent somebody to go cover the World Series every year. Usually it was Greg Larson, because he was kind of like the baseball guy during the 1980s. And I recall Greg going to every World Series. And I think the year before I went, I think Buddy Martin might have gone and covered a World Series for us in '88, and then I went the next year in '89. And what's amazing about that, because we talk about resources and traveling, obviously the Earthquake World Series Game 3 gets canceled, right?
Yeah.
And so I shift the next day to walking in the in the district of San Francisco, because my plane wasn't leaving until the next day, and so now you're a news writer instead of a sports writer.
Yeah, that's right.
And not only that, but after I came home, they sent me back for the last 2 games.
It's crazy.
So that was more. They spent more money than they were counting on, right? Because I had to go out to California not once but twice.
Yeah, and I bet the earthquake part was a little part of that motivation to go back too, right?
I'm sure. You never know. But I mean, the point, getting back to my original point, the papers had money then.
Yeah,
advertising dollars were flowing. Right, it would be 10 years right before everybody even heard of anything called the internet.
Oh yeah.
So back then, the relevance of the newspaper industry was in a far different place than it is today.
I know this is a hard question, but before we head to a break, quickly with Gene Frenette on Storytellers of the 904. When I say Jacksonville sports, who do you think of immediately?
When you first posed that to me, I think when I think of Jacksonville sports, you kind of think of a lot of different things. It all depends on, I think if you are from Jacksonville, it all depends on, what you grew up. Sometimes what happens in our childhood makes a bigger impression than what happens in a city in adulthood. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think for most people, the first thing would probably be Jaguars. That would probably be the first thing that would come to mind, simply because the NFL is so huge. But for others, it might be, Artis Gilmore and the Jacksonville Dolphins back in the day. But there isn't a whole lot to choose from, quite frankly, because Jacksonville never had a major pro sports franchise until 1995, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think now that the Jaguars are 30 years old, I think that their imprint and footprint in this city is what 90% of the people will think of when they think of sports in this town. It doesn't necessarily mean that others have no relevance whatsoever. But if you have to pick one, it's got to be the NFL, because its presence is so monstrous.
Yeah, so big. And, of course, there's a little recency bias in that. But, I mean, from a who standpoint, there are a lot of people to pick from. And I think so many would say a Tebow or a Bob Hayes. But you're right, it depends which, if you think about it, which we'll talk a little bit about how you thought about it with your top 100 that you really worked on toward the latter end of your career. Gene Frenette, Storytellers of the 904. Let's take a quick time out. When we come back, the story he wished he wrote, and also another question or two that predicts the future. He doesn't know yet about that. For Gene Frenette, it's coming up. When it's time to get a new car for anyone in your family, just remember, nobody but Nimnick, the #1 Buick GMC dealer in Jacksonville. Get the latest price breaks on 2023 and 2024 models, or the newest 2025 vehicles in the showroom on Phillips Highway, or shop online at nimnickbuickgmc.com 24 hours a day. GMC Sierras, Yukons, and the redesigned Acadias, or get the all-new redesigned line with Buicks. It's nobody but Nimnick, and part of the reason why is this is a first-class buying experience here at Nimnick Buick GMC. You're not just a customer, you're a friend. This is about getting a vehicle that best fits you and getting you on the road, and also helping you and your family down the road. Nimnick has a treating you right guarantee, courtesy, respect, fairness. And most Buicks, GMCs, and Jacksonville's only Car Bravo dealer, nobody but Nimnick. Who has put in the most years and stands behind a better experience? Nobody but Nimnick. GMC. We are professional grade.
Ladies and gentlemen, get on the edge of your seats, because this is an Action Sports Jax special presentation. Storytellers of the 904.
Welcome back to Storytellers of the 904. I'm Brent Martineau, and we're visiting with Gene Frenette, the columnist from the Florida Times-Union. Spent 44 years chronicling sports here in Jacksonville, a career that goes way back to 1969, recently retired, and he is our guest on the show here on this edition of Storytellers of the 904. Gene, I had this question about writing a column. Like, how much do you spend thinking of the idea, coming up with the ideas? Where do they come from? Are they sleepless nights? Are they usually just conversations? Like, what is that like for a columnist, maybe different than someone else in the newspaper, TV, whatever business?
Well, I certainly found that once I started writing columns that it was way, way different than beat writing. When I was a beat writer, whether it was with the University of Florida, Miami, or JU, I never gave much thought to worrying about what I was going to be writing next. Because when you're on a beat, stories just always pop up. I never found myself struggling to find stories to write when I was a beat writer. But as a columnist, especially once I started doing it on a full-time basis, much, much different. Now, some columns write themselves, right? Or you don't worry about coming up with a column idea from a game. Usually something will always emerge, right? But there are other days of the week where if there's not a whole lot going on, you're thinking, what am I going to write today? Is it going to be a feature-y type column? Is it going to be a strong opinion piece type column? Because, it's the menu for what makes for good column writing. There's not one cookie cutter formula, right? You write an effective column being a more feature writing, being more storytelling, being just either hard hitting criticism or praise for a job well done for whomever. But no, yeah, that is the number one thing I will not miss in retirement is not lying awake at night wondering what I'm going to write for next Tuesday.
Yeah.
Because that's real. Every columnist goes through that. And any columnist who says that he hasn't lied awake at nights, a little sleepless, wondering what he's going to write, even sometimes the next day. It could be Tuesday night and you got a column that's due, tomorrow night at 6:00 and you have no idea what you're going to write. That happens once in a while. It doesn't happen like every single week, but it happens. And you ask about getting ideas. I know this is going to sound silly, and it's certainly not my intention going in, but sometimes I'll be in the shower and something will just pop in my head. And I'm saying, oh, you know what? That's what I'm writing on Friday. And that has happened more often than you probably would think. Again, you don't go into the shower thinking, oh, well, I got a shower now because I got to come up with an idea. That's not
not a bad thinking place.
The whole intention is to go get clean. And if something, idea pops in your head, great, right? So, it could be anything. It could be while you're driving. Sometimes you could be listening to something or reading something, and that's not the idea, but you get a different idea of it off of that. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason sometimes for what hatches a column idea.
Well, with that, do you think you had a style, or do you think most columnists do have a style? Is that calculated? In our world, obviously, people have styles, and they like to. Sometimes we call it a shtick instead. Where are you on that scope?
Don't like shtick. Never have. Because when I think of shtick, I think of somebody who's a one-trick pony. And I don't think you can be an effective columnist doing that. Now, some people have made a career out of shtick, right? Mm-hmm. But I think shtick is more for TV. Dick Vitale has shtick, right? But the shtick works for him. It worked for him, okay? But as a writer, now this is just me, and other columnists may feel differently and may go about it differently. But I just don't like the idea that because to me, shtick sometimes, especially as a writer, feels a little bit forced. Mm. It may flow, it may come out great in one column, but then you try to do it for another, and it just doesn't work. So I'm not a big believer in that. To me, it's more about what can I write today that I think is number one different, and not just I don't want to be among the sheep that's just writing the same thing that everybody else is writing. Okay. Sometimes it may come across that way, but that's not the intent going in. I just kind of feel like, you got to be you. Whatever, I don't like shtick, so I don't do shtick. Okay, but somebody else may like it, and it may work for them, and that's fine. Everybody's different. That's why they call it opinion, right? Everybody's got something different. But I don't like to do anything that's forced. And to the credit of all the bosses I've ever had at the Times Union, nobody has ever come up to me and say, "Hey, I think you should write this for whenever." So no boss has ever come up to me and sort of kind of like nudged and say, hey, now obviously when I go to a game, I got to write about the game, right?
Yeah,
But nobody's ever come up to me, and because they think that way, I'm sure I've had plenty of bosses who might have disagreed with what I wrote. And that's fine.
Thing,
and
right?
That's fine too.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that too. But I think more than anything else, whether you're an athlete, whether you're in the media, whatever, you have to be you, because if you're not you, then you're not being genuine, and it doesn't come across as that way. To me, if you're trying to force something, it'll come across as forced.
Are you more positive or negative, do you think? What's the view on Gene Frenette, columnist?
I'd like to think I'm a mixture of both. I would hope people don't come away thinking, well, he's never going to write anything critical, or he's never going to praise anybody. Because I do not like columnists who are either all one or all the other. I think you have to be a little bit of both, because different situations are going to call for both, right? And, I've written, we'll take as an example, owner Shad Khan. I think he's a terrific owner from the standpoint that he's willing to spend money on his product, but he has not been a good owner in terms of being able to pick the right people to run his organization.
The story that you wish you had written in all the years, this could be plentiful, that you didn't write.
I wish you hadn't brought this up, because it's a reminder to me about how much I wish I had not allowed this to fall through the cracks. And it's my fault. When Telvin Smith, the linebacker for the Jaguars, who's probably the best late round pick they've ever had in their history, right? 5th round pick who turned into a Pro Bowler, when he decided to step away from the game, for reasons somewhat related to mental health. I think this happened about a little more than a year after his brother was murdered. Mm-hmm. That was in the 2006. Actually, I think it was 2 years, because I think he retired after he got out of football after the 2018 season. I think that's right, because what happened to his brother happened in the middle of the 2016 season. That I didn't go back and try to pursue what happened to Telvin Smith after that. I'd still be curious to know what his life is like today. Is he in a good place? Is he in a not so good place? What's he doing? What's he up to? Is he still in Valdosta, or where is he? And last year I got caught up with the Greatest 100 project, so I didn't, because I think that's a story you do in the off season. It's a hard story to do because you don't know how much time it's going to take to really get to the meat of that story, or if even Telvin or his friends would even want to talk about it. He might not want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not at this time, maybe.
But it's really a shame what happened with such a promising career. And hopefully from a mental health standpoint, he's doing well. But I do regret not having. I should have pursued that story. Been more on top of it, like during this time of the year, during May, June, July. Now, like I said, I might not have been able to get to it or do it the way I wanted to, but I do regret not taking a better shot at it.
Yeah, and that's one that was powerful during that 2016 season. You referenced that in your goodbye article in the Florida Times-Union when you did retire. And you mentioned a bunch of other stories too, which from the Michael Jordan interview, which was cool, just being able to land on that, which is obviously a pretty good feather in your cap, right? That was stand out. I thought when you teased that or said that, I was like, oh, he's going to talk about when he played baseball at Wilson Park. It wasn't that.
No, I can't take any credit for that. That's just happenstance.
Sometimes
right?
you get lucky.
You walked into the locker room and he was there, and nobody else was in that locker room. Happened to be on the night that his jersey got stolen at the Orlando Magic game, and he talked with me for maybe 3-4 minutes, something like that. But he was very cordial. I was stunned that he didn't blow me off, because he didn't know me from Adam.
Yeah. You mentioned the Top 100 project you did with Clayton Freeman recently, which is really cool. Again, part of some of these conversations, it gives us good historical perspective, especially folks that haven't been here forever or grew up here. And there's a lot of that in Jacksonville, as we know. But that list was tough. And I know you guys had all different parameters. But at the end of the day, how proud of that project are you and with what you guys turned out?
easily one of the top 2 or 3 things that I've been proud of in my career is that project, and it wouldn't have been possible without Clayton's help. Clayton provided great perspective on it, but more than anything else, Clayton dug up 2 former Negro League players that I had no idea, actually went to high school here in Jacksonville. John Henry Lloyd, and I forget the other guy's name escapes me, but John Henry. John Henry Lloyd was like, one of the top shortstops in the history of Negro League baseball, and they compared him to the pirate Honus Wagner.
Yeah.
They called him the Black Honus Wagner. That's some pretty high territory there. So Clayton was able to dig up those 2 Negro League ball players, one of them who ended up being a top 10, and the other guy I think was like maybe 21st, 22nd on the list. And, so that's history we didn't have before, right? So, very proud of that project. I also had forgotten about it. I probably should have mentioned it in my farewell column because this happened by, a suggestion made by one of our assistant sports editors at the time when the Cleveland Indians pitcher died in that boating accident just north of Orlando. And there was obviously some alcohol involved. There was teammates also involved. After that happened, so you had one Indians pitcher die, the other one got hurt. And I went out to trying to remember. I can't remember the name of the town that was just north of Orlando where the accident happened on this private, very, very exclusive kind of lake. But I went and talked with the widow of one of the Cleveland Indians pitcher who died, and and she gave me all the time. I spent probably 3 hours at her place, and ended up doing that story in February of '94, and the Times Union nominated it for a Pulitzer Prize.
Really?
Now it didn't win,
Wow.
but I was certainly very gratifying that they thought enough of the story to do that. And so that's another probably another story that I was really proud of doing, and a lot of and most of the stories are just I just had fun doing so many of them.
Yeah.
I mean I'd already written that my most fun day as a sports writer was going to the Hall of Fame when Tony Baselli and Leroy Butler were both inducted, because Leroy was somebody I knew since he was in high school, and of course covered all of Tony's career here. So to see 2 guys whose careers I was well schooled about both go in on the same day was very, very gratifying. Celebrating with them that night, going to their respective celebrations, was about as fun a time as I've ever had.
Are you surprised at the impact like your writing has had, like especially when you retired and you get all these well wishes and everybody says congratulations? Did you know it in real time that you were making an imprint in Jacksonville and people know who you are and all those things, or did it hit you kind of in full throttle when you retired?
Probably more the latter. You don't know how people are going to react. I mean, I knew I was going to get a lot of text messages and all the, just the routine stuff. Hey, congratulations and happy for you and all this other stuff. But, some of the stuff I thought got a little over the top. I mean, I just, I cringe a little bit. If you're going to throw out the L word, okay, and you should know what the L word is, right?
Yeah.
If you're gonna, save that for, save that for Michael Jordan, save that for Jim Murray, save that for people who's at least got some sort of national type stage. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm flattered that some people would have thrown that out, but I finally said to Mike Dempsey one day when he's interviewing, off camera, when we got in between breaks of an interview, I said, can you stop using that L word?
I haven't used it.
Okay, good. Because I just think that it gets
doesn't
thrown.
mean I don't think of that way.
It gets thrown out too loosely these days. In my opinion.
So is the word great. I was once told in college the most overused word in sports broadcasting is great.
Yeah.
And it does. Listen to people, and it really tings my ears like, oh, really? Is it great or is it good, right?
Yeah.
So I hear you, what you're saying. But that also is very complimentary by folks who obviously read that and feel that way. And that's the role of your medium. Over years, people wake up with that. That it's routine. It's you become part of their day, which is pretty cool. Are you concerned the way the newspaper business has gone that we lose some of that I just mentioned, but also things like the top 100, or who will document the history, right? I mean, I don't necessarily I've never thought TV stations do that or radio stations really do that as much as a newspaper does, where you can now Google something from 1980 whatever and get an article on it. A little harder to do on the video and audio side, easier to do on the print side, but are we going to lose that?
Yeah, I think we're definitely. Listen, there's only four right now, at least until the Times Union hires somebody to fill my position, and whether they do it as strictly a columnist or part columnist and part something else, I have no idea. But for now, we have only 4 full-time writers at the Times Union. 4. Amazing. That's it.
How many did you have at one time? Do you remember?
Full-time, we probably had close to 20.
Okay.
And if you added the part-timers, we'd probably be more like 28 or 30. Okay. And this was like, in the 80s and early 90s. There were, at one time, I think our newsroom had maybe about 115 people in it. Now it's about 20. So the resources that you have, you just can't. I mean, when I pick up the newspaper now, so much of it is filled with wire material. Right, it's particularly on the news side of things. Not that we don't cover local or anything like. Obviously, we still do. There's plenty of local stories in the paper, but because we don't have the resources to go. At one time we used to have a business writer. Well, we haven't had a business writer in I don't know how long.
Yeah.
So
used to have a media critic.
Yes, we used to have that as well.
I wish you still did.
Yeah. We used to have a TV radio column in the newspaper. I remember Gary Ledman did that one for years, and then Jeff Elliott took it over a little bit more on a part-time basis there towards the end of the. I don't know. Maybe I think probably early 2000 might have been the last time. Maybe late 2000.
Yeah, I think later because when I got here, Jeff was still doing some of that.
Yeah. So, but it's so much of it has changed. And the main thing is the resources. Because now, see what Gannett has done, Gannett, which owns the Florida Times Union, they bought all these papers throughout the state of Florida, right? Jacksonville, Pensacola, Lakeland, West Palm Beach, Brevard County, Fort Myers, Sarasota. I mean, Gannett owns all of those entities. Gainesville and Tallahassee as well. So now, there's no need for the Times Union to send a writer to a Florida State football game because the Gainesville and Tallahassee newspapers take care of it, and they become the conduit to the Florida fans that are in the Jacksonville area. Before, we used to go out and do that ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay, I haven't covered a Florida sporting event in probably about, I don't know, I can't remember, 3 or 4 years maybe.
Yeah.
So that's changed because the Gannett they're just pooling all their resources, and a lot of these papers, our papers. A lot of people in Jacksonville don't know this. The Florida Times Union is designed in Austin, Texas. Okay, and I think now it's changed. It used to be Gainesville, then it used to be Daytona, and then it was Savannah. One of those 3 places now is where the Times Union is printed.
Yeah.
So what they're doing is they're reducing their overhead by pooling all these papers, together, and you do get some interesting stuff out of it, right? But it's not the same as if your own people are producing it. And also, when it comes to the design, the editor's not going down into the composing room now and looking at the pages before the paper gets put to bed. He's communicating with somebody in Austin. Okay, this is what we want as our lead item in the paper the next day. But USA Today, the people at Gannett might have something different in mind, and they may make something NFL related or NBA related the central piece in the paper that next day, even though there's also a local story on the front that probably should have been the centerpiece.
Yeah,
so that's how much things have changed.
It has really changed. All right, we're going to go lightning round a little bit. You get connected to the late Corky Rogers and Bowles often. Why is that?
The genesis of all this probably happened about 2 years after I got out of being a prep writer and I was covering JU basketball. And I don't know how it got started, but I started going over to Lee High School to work out because I had a pretty good relationship with Corky. But then that mushroomed into the getting invited to their Friday night get-togethers after games. And one of the things I found out about going to those parties, not that I partook as much as these other guys did or coaches or whatever, but, you get alcohol in some of these coaches and the truth serum is fantastic because the stories come out and you find out off the record, of course, how they really feel about certain things. And one of the things that I kind of stumbled onto in all these get-togethers these were in my single days and, before I met my wife and all this, was how difficult play calling is for these guys. How much they might be looking, it might be like late third quarter, early fourth quarter of a tight game, and they're looking down at their play sheet, and they've already called a lot of these plays, or when are you going to pull something out, or do you pull something out, or do you take a chance, or what have you? How much these guys agonize over this, but they don't have 10 or 15 seconds to get some of these plays in. Of course, it's different with the NFL because they got, the press box and all that stuff, and then you got all that microphone communication. Well, you don't have, at the high school level, you don't have that. You send a player in with a play and, and what have you. But it kind of opened my eyes a little bit to how difficult coaching is for these guys, particularly when they're in tight games. Now, if they've got too much talent for the other team, or the other team has too much talent for them, you're not gonna. Your play calling is not going to be able to make a difference in the game. But in a tight game, it very well could.
Absolutely.
And so I'm always amazed because everybody in the stands thinks they're a coach, and if a play doesn't work, they think it was a bad play. Well, no, that's not always the case.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, maybe some player blew an assignment or what have you. But fans think that they know best in terms of what is going to work, despite the fact they don't go to any practices. They don't see how a play that they've used in practice might fail or might work fantastic, right? And then maybe that translates onto a Saturday game or a Sunday game, whatever the case may be. But coaching is a lot harder than they actually think it is, because if they actually had to call plays, they would find out.
Maybe freeze a little bit there. All right, speaking of Corky, we got some fan questions in here. Go bowling with one of these folks. Tony Dungy, Joe DeCamillis, Corky Rogers.
Bowling, ooh. You picked three good ones there.
Logan Cook was thrown in here for some reason, too.
Oh boy, these are media planted questions. You don't come up with that multiple choice without knowing a little something about my background. I've done so many other things with Corky Rogers over the years. I would probably pick one of the other guys. It might be Joe DeCamillis. He's just a really fun guy to be around. Tony Dungy is just one of the best human beings you could ever find in all of sports. I think I would much rather have dinner with Tony Dungy than go bowling with him. But for bowling, I think DeCamillis.
All right. How about a beer with not Trevor Lawrence? Well, you could pick Trevor, but I think the better one here is either Bortles or Minshew.
Probably Minshew. Because you just don't know. You just don't know. You don't know what Gardner will say.
Very good. That was very good. That was very impromptu there. The old Gary Smith's reference there. The technology it hasn't been easy at times, has it? Do you enjoy this kind of like character that you've built?
I'm sorry, I'm on mute now.
How do you? Is it truly that difficult at times? And do you like the playfulness of your role now as we've enhanced
it's
social
fine
media
because
and everything?
I'm fine with the playfulness of it because I sort of inadvertently created it for myself by mostly sometimes being too fast to text something without checking typos that might have appeared, such as the one I did today, talking about being grateful for to the shrimp owner Ken Babby for allowing me to throw out the first pitch, and then not seeing that I put his first name with a J and not a K. So, to which Ryan O'Halloran, of course,
I saw
fired back. Ken, sell the team.
I like that you take the fun and don't always fire back. That's we appreciate that. I'm sure you do fire back sometimes, but not all the time.
Only at Mark Long.
Yeah. He's an easy one to fire back at as well. All right, we're wrapping this thing up here with Gene Frenette, Storytellers of the 904. And two things to end on. One, I'll save my question at the end about the Jaguars. But first, you got a wonderful family, and now you get to spend time with all of them. I think you have a granddaughter, you said,
yep.
4 kids, kind of adults. And
also got a grandson, too.
A grandson as well. And obviously your wife Dot, so this must be a cool time. And you're great health, right? It looks like.
Yeah. I wanted to. I didn't want to be in a press box in my 70s. I just did. I'm 68. It's a good time to get out. I thought. I mean, like I said, I planned this like probably about a year and a half ago. I can't put into words, how supportive the family has been. I mean, it's not as I'm sure you know, because you're in a different part of the industry. I mean, you can't do it without your wife. I mean, it's just, and sometimes to be quite frankly, the job can be a little bit overbearing for them at times. Mm-hmm. That it's, I know, at least I can speak for myself. I struggle sometimes to not put the career too far in front of family, and I've been guilty of that at times. There's no doubt about it. I freely admit it, and sometimes, there are certain situations where, it has to come first. Like if the Jaguars are going to the Super Bowl, your priority isn't going to be going to the wife at the grocery store that week, right? So, but sometimes it can get to be a bit much, where the wheels are constantly spinning about the job and not. Say every so often, I don't know if it happens to you, but the wife says, "Hey, even when you're home, sometimes you're not home," and there's some regret to that. I don't think that it's not that I've missed a whole lot of my kids' events, but there are other times where you probably should be your headspace should be a little bit more focused on the family than on work. So that does happen. I mean, there's no way that I could have. I don't know if my wife knew that I was going to be a sports writer for the first 34 years of our marriage, and she would have seen what that was like. There might have given her a little bit of pause on the "I do" part, right? But she's been incredible, and the kids have been great, and I certainly want to invest in them in retirement, and I wanted to do it now. I didn't want to wait. I don't want to wait till a health circumstance or whatever. I want to be able to enjoy our time together while we can still travel, go places, things like that.
Well, you earned that. When will the Jags win a Super Bowl?
I mean, if they don't win one, let's say in the next 5 or 6 years, which is what I think it'll probably take. You look at what the Lions, I look at the Lions, you look at what they've done, right, to transform their franchise. We're talking about a franchise that, was it them or the Browns that went 0-16? I think it was the Browns.
No, the Lions.
The Lions went 0-16 one year.
2016 maybe it was?
Yeah, and probably went, 3-13 and 2-14 a lot, right, over the course of and you look at what the hiring of Dan Campbell has done to transform that franchise. And also Brad Holmes, the GM. People forget about him, but that's another LA Rams connected guy that has helped transform a moribund franchise, right? So there's a lot of optimism that James Gladstone and Liam Cohen can do that for the Jaguars. But I firmly believe it's going to take time. I mean, the Detroit Lions didn't suddenly become good in their first year or their second year, right? So maybe by the time they open that new stadium in 2028. You might see the Jaguars become a real Super Bowl contender. And they haven't been they were a real Super Bowl contender in 2017. They were a real Super Bowl contender in 1999, but those were really the only 2 years. I mean, yeah, they gave the Patriots a really good game back in 2007, but they weren't winning that game. Not with Tom Brady completing almost every single pass he threw in that
26
game.
for
right?
28.
So yeah, I would say that I don't think it's going to happen any sooner than another 5 years. And if it doesn't happen under this regime, God knows how much longer it will take, because we've seen what's happened with the Lions, with the Cleveland Browns, particularly those franchises who are heritage franchises, right? Who have never won a Super Bowl. They've won NFL championships, but they've never won a Super Bowl. So it could be a long time if the regime now doesn't do it in the next 5 or 6 years.
Gene Frenette, tough to put 44 years there in Jacksonville into an hour, but we just tried to do it, and happy retirement to you. And thanks for what we will call, just once on the show, a legendary writing career here in Jacksonville.
I appreciate it, Brett. Thanks for having me.